Welcome, everybody. Tonight we have the chance to meet Naomi Aldort in person. It's a great joy and pleasure to meet you. So thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight and make our special show. Tonight, not a live radio show, but an extra with picture show for your visit next week in Vienna. Thank you for joining us, first of all. And Naomi, you are the author of a very famous book that probably most of our listeners know, which is Raising Our Children, Raising Ourselves. It has been translated into 17 languages and has been something like a guide that has to do with authentic parenting, with attachment parenting. Also, you often will be compared with or put in the same league like Katie Byron with the work. Mm-hmm. I've read about that. Do you want to say anything about that yourself?
Well, I do a lot of work, that deep inquiry into what's actually true, because with children, we make up a lot of fantasy, a lot of stories about what the child should be or shouldn't be. And one day when I was giving a workshop many, many years ago, somebody asked me if I know Byron Katie, and I said no, why? And they said that what I teach is similar to her. So that's kind of how it started. So I met her, I spoke to her husband, and gave her my book too, and incorporated some of what she does in my work, because it was the same, and she has a methodology that makes it very easy to inquire into our thoughts. So we may have a thought, my child should listen to me, when we call them for dinner and they don't come right away, or we say we have to go somewhere. And when people work with me, they learn to question the thought, he should listen to me, as an example, or he should go to bed when I think he should go to bed, etc. So we look at those thoughts. Is it really true? And what we usually come to, which is exactly what the first chapter of my book talks about, the self formula, the S part, you kind of work on yourself, you remove your own reaction out of the way, using the work of Byron Katie, or just what I say in the book to do. And then you can actually see the child. And the child is the answer. What he's doing is what he should do. And if it's not something positive and useful, then our job is to find out the cause and the valid reason that the child has to do what they're doing. So that if we need to make changes, then we fix the cause rather than tell the child not to do it.
Mm-hmm. That fits perfectly to our main topic tonight, because we want to focus on deschooling for the parents as something that we have experienced in our own work with the unschoolers in Austria, especially, is the most important part.
Yes. Well, it's like my book says, raising our children, raising ourselves. Mm-hmm. So it's all of parenting. It's not just the deschooling, but when parents want for the child to not go to school and to not be in that system that clones them into a specific way of being, but to really create themselves from inside, from their own blueprint, so they can optimize themselves. The parents themselves find themselves having difficulty because of all these kind of thoughts, like, shouldn't he be learning to read? Shouldn't he be doing math already? How come he's not reading yet? What about this? What about that? Shouldn't they learn grammar? What about what his grandparents would say that he's not going to school, etc. So I think for parents to be very wonderful parents that learn attachment parenting, which I teach as well, and all the natural ways is fine, but really to cross the bridge of really respecting children and allowing them to be themselves rather than to be formed by us or molded, that takes, letting go of the schooling that we grew up with. So that whole paradigm is hard to let go of. It's not a simple thing.
What I experienced is that it's the hardest if you try to love your children unconditionally. You, of course, first have to love yourself unconditionally.
Yes, definitely. So that's a life work. I mean, those of us, if there are some of us that grew up really healthfully and connected to ourselves and rooted in ourselves, then maybe we don't have as much struggle, but most of us have not. And when I teach parenting, not just the unschooling, I always say when I am asked, and I'm asked often in interviews, if you had to summarize your work, like what is it? What's the essence, the most important goal, context that you need to teach parents? I say, protect the child from influences, keep them rooted in themselves. So that starts not just in learning, that starts in where does the child sleep? Everybody tells me not to sleep with me in the same bed because they're not going to be independent. But what is their independent choice? To sleep with you, right? And then you tell them, no, you go sleep by yourself. You're now 5 years old. And the child's conclusion is to be dependent. They're losing their independence because they're hearing, oh, I shouldn't listen to me. What me is saying, I want to sleep with mommy and daddy. But mommy and daddy are saying, I should not listen to me. I should not be independent with my own thinking. I should do what someone else tells me to do. And go and sleep in another room, even though I feel lonely there. They're not independent in the other room. They're just lonely or scared, right? So it's not just about schooling. It's kind of about everything.
Yeah.
It's
big word in there, in my point of view, is trust in yourself and in your children. It's the simplest and at the same time the hardest thing to achieve.
And that's, by the way, my book is Raising Our Children, Raising Ourselves, but my most famous set of CDs is called Trusting Our Children, Trusting Ourselves. And it's a set of CDs about unschooling, which is on my website.
So with your own 3 sons, I think you have?
Yes.
You have been unschooling.
Yes.
That means they did not get any formal education.
They did not get formal education. I don't know that I fit completely the unschooling paradigm the way it's done in the United States. There is now a movement called radical unschooling that is taking it to an extreme where children can eat marshmallows and watch TV all day. So my kids are telling me that I didn't exactly unschool because we made an effort to go to museums, to go to concerts, to read together, to do things that are educational, which I think most unschoolers do. And then 2 of my children chose to invest in music, in classical music, which requires a lot of practice and discipline. That was between them and their teachers, but it became a little bit part of the day-to-day, we needed to support them. So it didn't feel as much like unschooling as our firstborn. So it depends, in unschooling, it can go all kinds of directions. You may have a child who actually, out of themselves, want to do something that takes a lot of discipline. And then it doesn't look like unschooling because now they want us to hire a teacher, they want to practice, and and all of a sudden there is actual agenda.
Yeah, but the point is that the child has chosen this, so that's the big difference.
Yes. But I also am not one who says They should watch as much video games, play as much video games, and watch as much TV as they want and eat junk. I distinguish between free education to letting the industry educate my children. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important to distinguish, because at least in the United States, some of the unschooling movement take it to the extreme of letting the child be influenced by anything. Mm-hmm. You know, and some of those things are addictive, and for some of the children it works just fine, and the parents talk about everything and they can be exposed to everything. Some children, parents call me and say, you know, my son is for years nothing but video games, or, you know, constantly on gadgets. Mm-hmm. In today's world. So sometimes it's a little confusing with the addictive stuff. Like, is the child free when they eat sugar, or has he become addicted to sugar and lost his freedom? Mm-hmm. You follow?
You're getting back to the deschooling process. When you think back to how you all started out when your children were younger, how was it for you personally?
You know, for me, it was not hard. When I was 22, I read A.S. Neal books, Summerhill, mm-hmm. and Freedom Not License. And I was clear, that's it for me. I got it, that children are human beings. They're who they are, not what I formed them to be. So even when my first one was born, I already spoke about unschooling. When you're attached and loving your child and having this close relationship, the thought of sending them to some strange place and being with people you don't even know, and teachers, grown-ups that you don't even know, who would have huge impact on the child's life, I wasn't ready to do that. So I definitely started reading a lot more, you know, John Holt and everything. And I was clear, I did not struggle with a need to sit and teach them something. But because for the last 20 years, I work with a lot of parents, I know very well through them the different struggles that I mentioned before. When should they read? When should they do math? You know, all this kind of stuff that I did not struggle with, but I helped other parents to free themselves from.
Mm-hmm. So that means your three sons have always learned at an age range where you were still comfortable with it. So you were never uncomfortable with any of the things they've learned or did not learn.
I wasn't uncomfortable,
mm-hmm.
but not because they did it in an appropriate age, but because it didn't bother me that they didn't. Mm-hmm. Okay, with the first one, yeah, it was pretty easy. He was an avid reader. He taught himself to read, invented the method of teaching himself to read at age 6. So it was all kind of easy. And he was a lot into studying and reading and was interested in everything. But the second and the third, they were kind of focused mostly on music. The middle one did a lot of puzzles. He did some math, but the youngest one, he didn't want to do anything but music. He wasn't interested in math, or, you know, he read later. I don't know how he taught himself to read. I'm not sure exactly when. So each one is different, because like when parents get so nervous about like reading, I say that process of inventing a method to learn to read is a lot more important than the reading. Mm. And personally, I think later is better. We have enough of addiction to everything being written so that we don't have to remember. Young children have amazing memory and have amazing innovativeness that's free from this putting it into printed matter. Mm-hmm. So today I say to parents, the later the better, to really not rush and not be worried. If a child learns to read at age 13, 14, 15, within a week, their reading is not any different than the one who started at age 4. Mm-hmm. really is irrelevant. It's like all of us adults who started to walk at half a year instead of a year, or who started to walk only at 2. What difference does it make when we're adults and we're all walking? Who cares when you started?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of the same thing, and even more. I would say the reading becomes a dependency for all of us. We become very visual. We are less reliant on memory and more on the written word. And so why give that crutch to our children in a hurry? So I'm not saying slow them down or prevent them. I read books to my children, and then each one of them at different age found a different method to learn to read.
Mm-hmm. But I can, as a mother of 4 children between 3 and 13, I can totally relate to that fear that you can experience when one of your children does not do what society expects it to do at a certain age.
Right. Yeah.
So how in your work you guide parents or show parents that they can trust and love and everything is going to be okay?
Well, like what I just said, I point out to them that reading early has no advantages, and that there is no child who would not learn to read just for the same reason they learn to walk and to talk, because they want to succeed and they want to do what we do. So there is no such thing. That I relieve their worry, and I also do the work with them on thoughts of their worry. So if they have a thought, he'll never learn to read, and they write it down, she will never learn to read. And they look at it, and I say to them, well, is that true? And they laugh. Of course she'll learn to read. What do you mean? If they have a normal child, of course, sometimes there are disabilities, that's a different story. But if you're dealing with a normal child who learned to walk, who learned to talk, who did a lot of things that are very difficult that in the first 3 years of life they accomplish, that child is going to learn to read. Mm-hmm. You can't stop them. I say to parents, I say to them, try to stop them. You're not going to be able to.
I can see that there is a difference between children who have never been to any school or schooled at home, and children who have from birth on experienced that freedom, that they can choose what and when and how they want to learn.
Right.
So how is the deschooling then for those children who have been to school for 1, 2, 3, 4 years or more?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So that just takes them a little more break. I find that most of those kids need about a year or 2 of doing nothing, a dose of boredom, or what they call boredom. And I agree with Einstein, just daydreaming, meditation, recuperating their sense of themselves, so that they can come to learning from inside like they would have before they went to a school or a daycare. So we want to bring them back to that. And what I notice when parents call me when they took a child out of school is that for a while the child does nothing, because it's like being imprisoned for a while, and you're out of prison. You want to just like enjoy the freedom and not get into anything. And after a while, they start loving themselves, discovering themselves. Who am I? What do I want? And, the younger they are, the faster this process goes. One father just told me about a child that went to school for a full year, and he said that it took her about 2 weeks, and he could see not that final difference, but he could see a huge difference after just 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. of her being back to herself. But there was a boy that I read about, not one of my clients, in Sudbury Valley School, the Democratic School, which is completely free, where a high school boy or middle school, somewhere 14 or something, moved from a regular school to this completely free Democratic school. And he was sitting and fishing for 2 years and doing nothing else.
I've read about that too. Yeah, it must be in some book or something. Yeah.
Beautiful story. And the parents kept getting anxious and asking, Daniel Greenberg, what's going to happen? What is it? He's doing nothing. And they just kept reassuring him he's doing exactly what he needs to do to bring himself back to life from inside rather than follow somebody else's instructions. And then I think he became a successful, I don't remember, computers or something, that he does tell in the book, Daniel, what turned out later. But there was no problem. He just needed those 2 years of fishing and meditating, which is, by the way, regardless of getting out of school. I encourage parents to really feel comfortable. That's part of the deschooling, big part, is to see the children doing nothing. One of the best things children do is do nothing. Like be meditative. Otherwise, we grow up into these adults who are just so much in the brain, we get depressed because the joy comes from being, not from thinking. And not only that emotionally, but creativity comes from that nothingness in the silent moments between all these thoughts that aren't ours, that have been implemented in us. So again, what Einstein was talking about, that his imagination was always more useful to him than any education he has ever got. So I really encourage parents, if they tell me, just yesterday in Switzerland where I was speaking, somebody told me my child comes to me saying, I'm bored. And I said, where did he learn such a concept? See, we're teaching them that not doing anything is some problem, which we label as boredom. But there is no problem with not doing anything. And I told this mother, start modeling and do for yourself, just sitting around watching your breath. Watch the sunset, watch nothing, just be. Feel the air going in and out of you. Notice who you are. We're just so busy in the intellect. We forget that the most magical thing that is happening in being alive is this amazing apparatus, better than any computer and gadget on the planet. This one, who we are is a miracle. And here's a child just looking out and not doing anything, or watching the sky or the birds or the rain. And we think, oh, you need to go do something. That's how they learn that somehow inactivity is something wrong. But it's fantastic. I actually would like to see children do more of that, so they wouldn't have to go for 7 years to an ashram to undo all the learning and come back to themselves.
In any ways, nobody from the outside can ever tell what another person is experiencing.
And the brain doesn't stop working. In fact, after years of indoctrination to work here all the time, we go for the yoga classes and meditation. We try so hard to quiet it. And it's not easy. It's an automated, addictive system. It loves itself, and it has all this debating and thoughts, and we think we're so great when we think so much, or we have PhDs and academic knowledge, but we forget the most important part of being human. Isn't that? It's a different dimension of who we really are. And also that the innovativeness of the mind actually comes in those blank spaces of not doing anything. And definitely when everything we do is usually a repeat of ideas of someone else, rather than in those silence moments, we can actually get in touch with that being that isn't anybody else, that isn't somebody else's thoughts or dogma or ideas or right and wrong and duality and all of that.
Naomi, we could listen to you forever, I guess, but we want to announce the workshop and also the talk you're giving on the 18th of October in Vienna. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what is going to happen in the workshop and what they can
Can you remind me, I'm on 6 weeks tour all over Europe, and each evening has a different title, and I actually don't remember in advance. I look at the title I have to speak about just before I go there. So I know that the workshop is about unschooling. I don't remember the name of the title for the evening talk, so you can help me with that?
Yeah. It's okay to just call it workshop, I guess. I think everybody just wants to more or less know what, how this is going to be different, the workshop from the talk night.
Katinka knows the subject.
The name of the workshop is Self-Directed Learning by Kids in Everyday Life.
Yeah, but the evening.
And the evening is Raising Our Children, Raising Ourselves.
Okay.
Okay,
thank you, Katinka.
So let me tell you more about that then. So in the evening, it's a shorter event, but the workshop actually comes first. The evening will get into the context of being for parenting. When a child is born, all of a sudden you are being recorded, you're being copied. So there is a wake-up call for the parent. Oh my God, I'm being watched and duplicated. I better get myself up to it. So what I like to talk in those evenings is, so what I like to talk about this evening is to learn to raise yourself so that you can be the parent that you want to be for your child rather than the reaction machine. So it really has to do with the book and general parenting questions. Now in the workshop, I'll focus specifically on the unschooling and unschooling ourselves so we can unschool our children and distinguish freedom from license. Because many times it's very confusing and a lot of unschooling parents think that freedom means the child can do whatever they want, which nobody can in life. So I will definitely help parents distinguish that so that they're not all confused and getting into a lot of discomfort in day-to-day life about what to do with life. But also I will answer a lot of questions and I will get into the different subjects and how children learn them and why the school is actually ruining the ability of the child to learn. Also the questions that are very common about unschooling, how the social development. I will explain and show exactly why school actually does harm to social development and how being away from school is actually what develops social skill in the correct way and in the best way for our children, as well as how to support our children to find their passions and to develop them, and creative ways of doing that outside of school. In fact, the school is the worst place for it anyway, for the most part, and I will explain why in depth. So we will get into part of what John Gatto talks about too. What is being learned in school that isn't the academic, but is human qualities that are all destructive. Children go to school and they think, well, but they will get this and they'll learn geography and they'll learn history. No, they will learn competition. They will learn levels of society. They'll learn to hate others and to want them to fail. They will learn to shorten span of attention when the bell rings. And, I will elaborate on all of that. I will also elaborate on why not to praise, because it's manipulative. And I'll get into details of other things that are manipulative that we're not aware of. So in other words, we're going to raise consciousness in ourselves in how are we manipulating a child, even when maybe we think they're at home and out in the community and they're free and we don't tell them to study. But then maybe we're not aware of how we're still manipulating and getting in the way, because children want so much to please us that we actually have to constantly release that so that they can do things for their own sake, and also not for outcome, but for process. And then I will actually cover specific subjects, whatever parents will be asking, so that whatever somebody's anxious about, how will my child learn this? My child is talented in this. My child is very interested in this. How can I provide? And I will answer those questions and see subject for subject how to do it without praise, without manipulation, but with support, exposure, and trust. Real trust.
So I personally am very much looking forward to meeting you in person, and so curious about all the other people there asking their questions and you giving the answers. So I want to thank you with all my heart for all the work you've done and for the time you've given us, and very much looking forward to meeting everybody and invite everybody, of course, again for the 18th in Vienna.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, please come. It's an exciting opportunity, also for networking and, of course, for meeting Naomi. Thank you very much, Naomi.
Thank you, Karin. It's delightful being with you.